My parents worked their entire lives. 43 years between the two of them, steady jobs, steady paychecks, and every single one of those paychecks had Social Security tax withheld before they ever saw the money. I sat down a few months ago and actually ran the numbers, going back through old pay stubs, old tax returns, and SSA earnings statements, and the total my parents paid into Social Security over their working lives came out to just over $1 million combined. Employee contributions and employer contributions together, the full 12.4% that goes into the system every single year on every dollar they earn up to the taxable maximum. $1 million. And when I looked at what they are actually receiving now in retirement, the math did not add up the way I expected it to. Not even close. My father is 74. My mother is 71. Between the two of them, they receive a combined $3,400 a month from Social Security. That is $40,800 a year. At that rate, it would take them roughly 25 years of combined benefits just to receive back the principal they paid in, never mind any return on it. Never mind any growth. Never mind accounting for the fact that money paid in 1985 is worth dramatically more in real terms than money received in 2026. I went looking for an explanation, expecting to find that I had made an error somewhere in the math, or that I was missing some piece of context that would make the numbers make sense. What I found instead was a system that is far more complicated, far less transparent, and in some specific and correctable ways, far less generous to people like my parents than almost anyone realizes until they sit down and actually do the calculation themselves. Today, I'm going to walk you through exactly what I found, because if your parents are anything like mine, there's a real chance they are leaving money on the table right now that they are legally entitled to. And there's a real chance the math on what they pay versus what they are receiving is far more lopsided than they have ever stopped to calculate. Before I get into what I found, subscribe to this channel and turn on the bell. What started as a personal project digging into my own parent situation turned into something I now spend a significant amount of time researching and explaining, because it turns out their situation is not unusual. It is closer to the norm. The Social Security system was never designed the way most people assume it was designed, and understanding that gap between assumption and reality is the first step toward making sure you and the people you love are getting what you are actually entitled to. Subscribe, turn on the bell, and let me walk you through exactly what I learned. The first thing I had to understand is that Social Security was never built as a personal savings account. Even though the language around it, your contributions, your benefit, your earnings record, makes it sound exactly like one. It is a pay-as-you-go system. The money my parents paid in during the 1980s and 1990s was not set aside in an account with their names on it, growing and waiting for them to retire. It was paid out almost immediately to the retirees who were collecting benefits at that time. My parents' current benefit is being paid by the payroll taxes of people working right now, today, in 2026. This structure means there has never been a direct, individualized link between what a specific person pays in and what that specific person gets back. The system is built around broad actuarial assumptions: average life expectancy, average wage growth, average return assumptions, applied across the entire working population, not calculated and reserved for each individual contributor. Understanding this reframed the entire question for me. The question is not, why didn't my parents get back what they put in, as if there was ever supposed to be a direct dollar-for-dollar return. The real question became whether my parents are receiving the maximum benefit they are entitled to under the formula that does exist, and that is where things got interesting, because the answer, once I actually checked, was no. The second thing I discovered, and this is the part that genuinely shocked me, is that my mother had never had her benefit compared against my father's record, even though she would be entitled to a spousal benefit if his record produced a higher number than her own. My mother worked for 19 years before staying home to raise my brother and me, then returned to part-time work for another decade. Her own earnings record reflects that gap. My father worked continuously for 38 years in a higher-earning field. Under Social Security rules, a spouse is entitled to up to 50% of the higher-earning spouse's full retirement age benefit, if that amount is higher than what they would receive on their own record. Nobody at the SSA proactively ran this comparison for my parents when my mother claimed. She applied for her own retirement benefit, The SSA processed it based on her own earnings record, and that was that. When I called SSA on her behalf and specifically requested that they compare her benefit against the spousal benefit available on my father's record, the difference was $310 a month. $310 every month that my mother was entitled to and was not receiving for years, simply because nobody had ever specifically asked for the comparison. If you have a parent who took time away from the workforce to raise children or who earns significantly less than their spouse over their career, this comparison needs to happen. Call 1-800-772-1213 and ask SSA directly to compare your parent's own retirement benefit against the spousal benefit available on their spouse's record, and ask them to confirm in writing which one is higher. The third thing I found involves my father specifically, and it goes back to a decision he made at 63 that neither of us fully understood the consequences of at the time. My father claimed Social Security at 63, 3 years before his full retirement age of 66. He claimed early because he had just been laid off after 30 years with the same company, and the income felt necessary at the time. What I did not understand until I actually ran the numbers years later is exactly how permanent that decision was. Claiming 3 years early reduced his benefit by approximately 20%, and that reduction is not temporary. It does not adjust upward once he reaches full retirement age. It is baked into his benefit for the rest of his life, and every cost of living adjustment since then has been applied to that already reduced number rather than to what his full benefit would have been. Had he waited until 66, his monthly benefit would be roughly $375 higher than it currently is every single month for the rest of his life. Over the 11 years since he claimed, that gap alone represents approximately $49,500 in benefits he did not receive, money that is permanently gone and cannot be recovered or corrected after the fact. I am not telling this part of the story to suggest my father made the wrong decision. He needed the income at that moment, and he made the choice that made sense for his family's immediate circumstances. I'm telling this part of the story because the SSA never sat him down and walked him through what that decision would cost over the following decade. They asked if he understood his benefit would be reduced. He said yes, and the conversation ended there. If you have a parent who is approaching a claiming decision right now, before that decision is made, sit down together and use the SSA's benefit estimator at ss.gov to compare what their monthly benefit looks like at 62, at full retirement age, and at 70. Look at the actual dollar numbers side by side. That conversation, had before the decision instead of years after, is worth tens of thousands of dollars over a typical retirement. The fourth thing I discovered involves Medicare premiums, and it directly affects how much of my parents' Social Security check actually makes it into their hands each month. Both of my parents pay Medicare Part B premiums, and those premiums are automatically deducted from their Social Security payment before they ever see it. Standard Part B in 2026 is $185 a month per person. For my parents combined, that is $370 a month for $1,440 a year coming directly out of the Social Security income one had been calculating. What I learned is that this deduction is invisible in a very specific way. When people talk about their Social Security benefit, they almost always mean the gross benefit amount calculated from their earnings record, not the net amount that actually lands in their bank account after Medicare premiums are withheld. For a lot of families, including mine, there's a meaningful gap between the number people think they are receiving and the number that actually shows up. This matters for the math my parents and I were doing, because it meant the effective return on their lifetime contributions was even lower than the raw benefit number suggested, since a real chunk of the gross benefit is being redirected to healthcare costs before it ever reaches them. The fifth thing I found is the one that ties everything together and that I think matters most for anyone listening to this who has parents in a similar situation. My parents, like most people, never once requested a full, formal review of their combined Social Security situation. Not what my mother claimed. Not what my father claimed early. Not in the years since. They received what the system processed based on the applications they submitted, and they assumed that was simply what they were entitled to. It never occurred to either of them that there were comparisons to be requested, calculations to be double-checked, or that the SSA would not proactively tell them about a higher paying option that existed on a spouse's record. The system is built on application, not on automatic optimization. It pays you what you ask for, calculated correctly based on what you submitted, but does not go looking for the better option on your behalf. That gap between what the system technically owes you and what it will automatically calculate and pay you without prompting is where a tremendous amount of money is left unclaimed by people exactly like my parents, people who worked hard, paid inconsistently, and simply trusted that the number they were given was the number they were supposed to get. So here is what I would tell anyone watching this whose parents have been collecting Social Security for years and have never specifically requested a full benefit review. Call 1-800-772-1213 together as a family and ask for three things explicitly. Ask them to compare each parent's own retirement benefit against any spousal or survivor benefit they might be entitled to on the other's record. Ask them to confirm that any delayed retirement credits or early claiming reductions were calculated correctly based on the exact birth month and claiming date. And ask them to provide a written breakdown of exactly how the current benefit amount was calculated, so you can review it line by line rather than simply trusting that the number is right because it has always been the number. My parents paid $1 million into this system over their working lives. They're never going to get that back in any literal sense because that was never how the system was designed to work. But they were leaving real, correctable money on the table simply because nobody had ever asked the right questions on their behalf. And once we did, the answer changed their monthly income permanently. If your parents are receiving Social Security right now, make this call with them. It might be the most valuable conversation you have with them all year. Subscribe, share this with someone whose parents are on Social Security, and I will see you in the next one.